Imagine sitting at a table where the silver is polished, but the hearts are cold as ice. I was just trying to pass the salt when Mark, my sister's new prize boyfriend, smirked and called me the unemployed charity case of the family. The air in the room didn't freeze. It shattered with the sound of my own parents' laughter, joining in on the joke. It was a classic family drama moment where I was the punchline, feeling completely humiliated while they toasted to his supposed success. I felt shamed in front of the very people who were supposed to be my safety net, but they just saw a loser. My sister, Elena, didn't even look up from her wine, acting like my presence was a stain on her perfect life. It was the ultimate betrayal, a stinging reminder that in this house, my self-worth was always measured by someone else's yardstick. They didn't see the woman who had been quietly rebuilding herself. They only saw someone they could easily kick around. The mockery felt like a physical weight, but I kept my head high, refusing to let them see me crumble. Being backstabbed by your own blood is a special kind of pain, especially when it's done for the entertainment of a stranger. I realized then that their love was conditional, tied strictly to the dignity they thought I lacked because I didn't have a fancy title. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a wake-up call that I was playing a game with people who didn't care if I lost. Mark kept going, boasting about his 7-figure ventures while throwing pitying glances my way like I was some stray dog. I sat there, feeling shamed but also strangely detached, as if I were watching a poorly acted play from the front row. My mother patted his hand, telling him how refreshing his honesty was, while my father nodded in total agreement, though for a split second I saw him squint at Mark, a flicker of doubt he quickly suppressed. But doubt wasn't allowed in this family. Image always won. He swallowed that doubt the way he swallowed his pride, quickly and without chewing. The disloyalty of their support was staggering, choosing a man they'd known for months over the daughter they'd raised for decades. I swallowed my pride along with a bite of cold steak, realizing that the family betrayal was now complete and out in the open. I looked at Mark's smug face and saw the cracks in the mask, a flicker of something that didn't quite sit right. It was a shocking realization that while they were busy laughing at me, they were completely blind to the person they were inviting in. I didn't say a word to defend myself because something told me this wouldn't end the way he expected. There's a certain power in being the one everyone ignores because it makes you invisible enough to truly see the truth. While they were busy celebrating Mark's brilliance, I began noticing inconsistencies in his loud, arrogant stories. He was so comfortable in his lies that he started getting sloppy, thinking I was too unsuccessful to notice. Little did he know, his little jokes were about to collide with something he couldn't charm his way out of. Maybe not tonight, but soon. In my family, if it doesn't look good in a photo, it simply doesn't exist, and I've always been the glitch in their gallery. My parents are obsessed with status, treating life like a high-stakes PR campaign where Elena is the star and I'm the background noise. They embraced Mark instantly because he fits the successful son-in-law mold they crave, ignoring every red flag for the sake of a perfect family betrayal. It's all about the brand, never about the bond, and I was the one they were trying to rebrand. They treat me like an embarrassment they merely tolerate, a secret they wish they could keep hidden in the attic during dinner parties. Watching them fawn over Mark was like watching a masterclass in superficiality, where self-worth is traded for the right zip code. They didn't care who he was inside as long as his watch was expensive and his car was fast. It was shocking to see how easily they traded their own daughter's dignity for a bit of reflected glory. I watched my mother adjust Mark's collar with more tenderness than she'd ever shown me in my entire adult life. To them, I was just a reminder of failure, a person who didn't contribute to the family's shiny, hollow reputation. They lied to themselves every day, pretending we were a tight-knit unit while I was being systematically pushed to the margins. The humiliated feeling I carried wasn't from my lack of a job, but from their lack of a soul. Elena smiled at him like he was a king, completely oblivious to the fact that she was being used as a trophy for his ego. My parents didn't see a man. They saw a resume they could brag about at the country club to impress their friends. This family drama was fueled by their desperate need to be envied, even if it meant stepping on me to reach the top. They were so caught up in the image that they never bothered to look at the truth staring them in the face. I've spent years trying to fit into their frame, but I finally realized I'm the one who needs to break the glass. Their obsession with class is just a mask for their own deep-seated insecurities, and they hate that I don't play the game. Being backstabbed by your parents' expectations is a slow burn, but it's a fire that eventually hardens you. They thought they were protecting their image, but they were actually setting the stage for a very public karma. It's funny how people who live in glass houses are always the first ones to throw stones at the unsuccessful ones. They think they've won because they have the perfect family dynamic on display, but the foundation is made of sand. I stood in the corner of the room, the invisible daughter, realizing that my reclaiming of my life started with accepting they'd never see me. They were so busy looking at the fake gold that they missed the real storm brewing right outside their door. Instead of reacting to Mark's insults, I leaned back and did something I've become an expert at. I started watching. I noticed the way his eyes darted when my father asked a specific question about his supposed tech merger in London. Something didn't click, a tiny detail about the timeline that felt like a lied story told too many times. I knew right then that the truth was buried under layers of expensive cologne and practiced smiles. While they were laughing, I was cataloging his gestures, the way he gripped his glass a little too tight when investors were mentioned. I couldn't believe they were all falling for it, but then again, they wanted to believe in the lie more than they wanted to see me. It was a shocking display of willful ignorance, and I was the only one with my eyes wide open. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about seeing just how far this rabbit hole went. He claimed to be a partner at a firm that I'd vaguely heard of, but his jargon was just a bit too textbook and a bit too rehearsed. I stayed silent, letting him dig his own grave with every boastful sentence and every condescending advice he gave me. The family betrayal was the distraction he needed, and my parents provided it on a silver platter. I realized that the best way to get payback was to let him think he was the smartest person in the room. There's a specific kind of tell people have when they are overcompensating, and Mark was practically screaming it with his body language. I watched him check his watch repeatedly, not like someone with a busy schedule, but like someone waiting for a clock to run out. I felt a surge of self-worth as I realized I was the only one smart enough to catch the slip-ups. They thought I was unemployed and slow, but I wasn't out of work for lack of skill, only for lack of a title. And research had always been my quiet strength. I started taking mental notes of the names he dropped, high-profile CEOs and obscure venture capitalists that sounded impressive but felt hollow. Every time he spoke, I found a new thread to pull, a new contradiction that made the betrayal feel even more inevitable. My family's laughter became background noise to the symphony of lies he was composing right in front of us. I wasn't just a victim of their family drama anymore. I was the lead investigator. By the time dessert was served, I had a list of 5 major red flags that didn't align with his glamorous career path. I looked at Elena, so proud of her catch, and felt a flicker of pity before remembering how she joined in on the mockery. This was going to be the ultimate justice, served not with a shout, but with the cold, hard facts. I smiled to myself, knowing that the next few weeks were going to change everything for all of us. That night, I couldn't sleep. Those small contradictions kept replaying in my mind like a broken record I couldn't turn off. I started a quiet but determined investigation, sitting in the dark with my laptop glowing like a beacon of vengeance. I searched for his successful firm and found a website that looked like it was designed in 20 minutes by a high schooler. It was the truth starting to peek through the cracks, and I was ready to tear the whole wall down. I stayed up until 4 a.m., digging through social media and professional registries, looking for any trace of the Mark he sold to my parents. Every search result came up empty or led to a dead end, making me feel backstabbed on behalf of my sister, despite her cruelty. He wasn't a partner. He wasn't even an associate at the companies he mentioned with such unearned confidence. Some of it was public. The rest came from people he'd already burned who were eager to talk once I asked the right questions. It was a shocking level of deception, and the unemployed girl was the only one who cared to look. The more I looked, the more I realized that Mark was a professional ghost, a man built entirely out of LinkedIn buzzwords and stolen photos. I felt a sense of justice bubbling up as I realized his wealth was likely just as fabricated as his job title. My family was so blinded by the perfect image that they hadn't even checked if his office actually existed. They were so busy being humiliated by me that they didn't realize they were being scammed by him. I found an old blog post from 3 years ago where a woman described a man with the exact same MO who had vanished with her savings. My heart raced as I realized this wasn't just a lie. It was a dangerous pattern of disloyalty and financial ruin. I couldn't believe my parents had let this wolf into our home just because he wore a nice suit. My father had made Mark family fast. Passwords, IDs, even a copy of his financial profile, all in the name of trust. The family betrayal took on a darker tone as I saw the potential disaster heading straight for my sister. I decided to go deeper, contacting a few people from his supposed past lives to see if anyone would talk to the unemployed sister. I was reclaiming my power, using the very free time they mocked to dismantle the predator they had invited to dinner. Every email I sent felt like a step toward karma, a way to protect what was left of my family's actual security. I wasn't doing this for them anymore. I was doing it for my own dignity. By the end of the week, I had enough cracks to know the whole structure was about to collapse on its own. I had names, dates, and a trail of unhappy people who had been cheated by the man my parents called a genius. The quiet investigation was turning into a loud reality, and I was the one holding the megaphone. This wasn't about a job anymore. It was about the ultimate payback for every laugh they shared at my expense. With help from a former colleague, a genius who taught me everything I knew about data, I finally hit the jackpot of his deception. My colleague didn't just help. She had access to legitimate databases and knew exactly where to pull public records fast. We discovered a network of shell companies, all registered to virtual offices that were nothing more than P.O. boxes in Delaware. It was a shocking web of irregular transactions and fabricated professional achievements designed to lure in unsuspecting investors like my parents. This was a full-scale criminal enterprise disguised as a success story. The awards he bragged about were bought from vanity sites, and his degree was from a university that didn't have a record of him. I felt a cold sense of vengeance as I printed out the documents, each page a testament to how much he had lied. He was a vulture picking at the bones of people's dreams, and my family was his next scheduled meal. The betrayal I felt from my parents was nothing compared to the fraud he was committing. My friend found evidence of investments Mark had taken from small-time players who were now broke and seeking justice. It turned out he was operating on promises and smoke and mirrors rather than any legitimate work or assets. He didn't need my father's signature. He needed my father's identity, and my parents handed him every document like it was a VIP pass. I sat there, looking at the screen, feeling humiliated for being related to people so easily fooled by shiny things. But I also felt a surge of self-worth because I was the only one who saw the wolf. Every shell company had a different name, but they all bled back to the same bank account, one that was currently being drained. He was planning his exit strategy while my sister was picking out bridesmaids' dresses, and my parents were bragging about the wedding. The truth was so much worse than I imagined. He wasn't just a liar, he was a thief of lives. I was backstabbed by my family's lack of faith in me, but I was the one holding their survival in my hands. I realized he was using my family's social standing to gain credibility for his next big round of funding. He was literally selling our family name to people he intended to leave in the dust, just like he would leave Elena. This was the ultimate karma, a man who lived for image being taken down by the woman he called a charity case. I gathered every irregular transaction, every fake filing, and every proof of his disloyalty to the truth. I felt like I was holding a live wire, the energy of the discovery coursing through me with a dangerous, quiet power. My parents' words at dinner, the laughter, the mocks, the shamed looks, they all felt so small now compared to this. I was no longer the unemployed daughter. I was the gatekeeper of their entire future, whether they liked it or not. The reclaiming of my position in this family was going to be loud, public, and absolutely undeniable. The evidence didn't just suggest he was a liar. It proved he was a predator who specialized in image-obsessed families like mine. I found 3 other women in 3 different states who had been cheated out of their inheritance by this same man. He would move in, dazzle the parents, marry the daughter, and then vanish when the accounts were dry. It was a shocking cycle of destruction that my sister was currently sprinting toward with a smile on her face. I looked at the photos of the other victims, women who looked just as happy as Elena did in her engagement posts. They were humiliated and left with nothing, while Mark moved on to the next city and the next unemployed sister to mock. This was a family betrayal on a grander scale, where he used our own internal conflicts to keep everyone distracted. I realized that if I didn't act, my sister's life would be the next one he dismantled for sport. He was misleading investors right now, using my father's business legacy as collateral for loans he had no intention of paying back. My father, so proud of his sharp eye, was literally handing the keys to our family's security to a professional con artist. The disloyalty of Mark's character was complete. He didn't love Elena. He loved the access she provided to my parents' bank accounts. It made me sick to my stomach, but it also made me incredibly focused on the vengeance to come. I saw the investor updates he was sending out, full of lies and promises that were legally impossible to keep. He was putting my sister at serious risk of being an accomplice, dragging her into a legal nightmare she wouldn't survive. My parents were so blinded by the dignity of having a wealthy son-in-law that they were ignoring the sirens. I felt a heavy responsibility, realizing that justice was now my job alone, even if they hated me for it. The dangerous pattern was so clear once you looked past the designer suits and the charming English accent he sometimes faked. He was a chameleon who changed his colors to match whatever his prey wanted to see, and my family wanted a winner. They were so ready to be backstabbed because they refused to value anything that wasn't wrapped in a luxury brand. I was the only one who could see the winner was actually a high-stakes gambler playing with our lives. I knew I couldn't just tell them. They would call me jealous or bitter because of the way they'd always treated me. I had to show them in a way that couldn't be ignored, in a place where their precious image would be at stake. The family drama was about to go from a private dinner to a public execution of his reputation, and mine. I was preparing for the moment where the truth would finally be the only thing left standing in the room. The mail arrived on a Tuesday, a thick cream-colored envelope with gold leafing that practically screamed status and wealth. It was the invitation to Elena and Mark's wedding of the century. Holding it felt like holding a ticking time bomb, a physical manifestation of the family betrayal that was about to be finalized. I looked at the save the date and knew this was the perfect moment when appearances would matter most. My mother called me later that day, not to check on me, but to remind me to try and look presentable so I wouldn't ruin the photos. She lied and said she was so happy for me to be there, but her tone said I was just a necessary checkbox for the guest list. The humiliated girl from the dinner party was expected to show up, smile, and play the role of the lesser sister one last time. I felt a surge of self-worth knowing that I wouldn't be playing that role at all. This wedding was where truths would be hardest to hide because every influential person my parents knew would be in that room. It was the stage Mark had built for his biggest scam yet, and I was going to be the one to bring the curtains down. I felt a cold sense of justice as I RSVP'd, knowing that the unemployed sister was bringing a very special gift. They wanted a show, and I was going to give them one they would never, ever forget. I could see the headlines they wanted, a perfect union of 2 powerhouse families, but I knew the shocking reality behind the font. Mark was planning to use the wedding reception to announce a new investment opportunity to all of our family's wealthy friends. He was literally using his own wedding as a hunting ground for his next round of victims, including my own father. The betrayal was so deep it was almost impressive if it wasn't so incredibly cruel. I looked at the invitation again and saw the venue, a private estate where privacy was guaranteed, or so they thought. I spent the evening staring at it, realizing that reclaiming my family's safety meant destroying the perfect day they'd all worked so hard for. I wasn't just a guest. I was the ghost at the feast, the one person Mark hadn't accounted for in his perfect plan. The family drama was about to hit a climax that no one in that room was prepared for. I started planning my outfit, but instead of dresses, I was thinking about folders, thumb drives, and verified bank statements. I knew that payback was a dish best served in front of a live audience, where the lies couldn't be whispered away later. I felt a calm I hadn't felt in years, a sense of dignity that didn't come from a job title, but from the truth. The wedding wasn't an end. It was the beginning of the end for the man who thought he'd won. I didn't want a scene. I wanted a conviction. So I spent the next month organizing every piece of paper like a legal brief. I had verified documents, financial records, and public filings from 3 different countries, all neatly categorized and cross-referenced. I was choosing facts over drama and silence over confrontation, waiting for the one moment when he couldn't run away from the truth. I felt a sense of justice in the precision of my work, a quiet power in the piles of paper. I made copies of everything, the shell company registrations, the cease and desist letters from former victims, and the fake degree certificates. I wanted the payback to be undeniable, a wall of evidence that even my status-obsessed parents couldn't climb over. I felt backstabbed every time I thought about Mark's smug face, but that only made my handwriting steadier. Every document was a bullet, and I was making sure my aim was perfect for the big day. I even tracked down a recorded statement from one of the women he'd cheated out of her life savings 5 years ago. Hearing her voice, broken, shamed, and still trying to recover, reminded me that this wasn't just about my ego or a dinner party joke. This was about karma coming home to roost for a man who thought he was untouchable because he was charming. I was no longer the girl they mocked. I was the architect of his public unraveling, and I felt a new sense of self-worth. I organized the folders by the lie versus the reality, making it so simple that even a child, or my father, could understand the depth of the fraud. I felt a strange sense of dignity in being the one to protect the family that had spent years trying to push me away. This wasn't about vengeance for the sake of hurting them. It was about saving them from a disaster they were too proud to see. I was the unemployed daughter doing the most important work of her life. I practiced what I would say, keeping my voice calm and my heart steady, refusing to let emotion cloud the clarity of the facts. I knew that if I came across as bitter, they would dismiss me, so I had to be the most rational person in the room. The shocking nature of the evidence would speak for itself if I just presented it without the theatrics. I was preparing to be the truth-teller in a family that had lived on a diet of beautiful lies for far too long. On the night before the wedding, I sat in my room with the final folder, feeling a mix of dread and a bizarre kind of peace. I knew that after tomorrow, my relationship with my family would never be the same. But I also knew I couldn't live with the disloyalty of silence. The family betrayal was about to be met with a cold, hard dose of reality that no one could ignore. I closed the folder, ready to walk into the lion's den with nothing but the truth as my shield. The wedding was as opulent as expected. White roses everywhere, a 10-piece orchestra, and enough champagne to drown a small city. Mark looked the part of the perfect groom, already whispering investment opportunities to my father's wealthy colleagues. I waited until the reception was in full swing, when the speeches were starting and the validation was at its absolute peak. It was time for the justice I had spent months preparing, and my heart was as steady as a rock. I walked up to the head table during a lull in the music, my face a mask of absolute calm. I simply placed the master folder in front of Mark and the newlyweds, right next to the crystal centerpieces. I watched the color drain from his face as he saw the first page, the registration of his primary shell company. It was a shocking moment of silence in a room that had been filled with forced, expensive laughter just seconds before. "I think you dropped your business plan, Mark," I said, my voice carrying just enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Elena looked at me with pure venom, thinking I was just trying to cause a family drama. But then she saw the photos of the other women, the ones he'd cheated and left behind, and her expression shifted to confusion. The betrayal was written in black and white, and for the first time in her life, she couldn't look away. Mark tried to laugh it off, calling it a sad attempt at a prank, but his voice was shaking. I didn't argue. I just pointed to the second page, the bank records showing the loans he'd already taken out in my father's name. My father stood up, his face turning a deep shade of red as he realized the truth was staring him in the face. The humiliated daughter was now the only one with any authority in the room, and the air felt electric. The room went deathly quiet as my father flipped through the pages, his sharp business mind finally seeing the glaring, criminal inconsistencies. Mark's public unraveling began in real time, his confidence collapsing like a house of cards. He started stuttering, trying to explain away the shell companies, but the documents were verified and undeniable. It was a moment of absolute karma, served on a silver platter at the most expensive party of the year. Elena started to cry, not out of sadness, but out of the sheer shamed realization that her perfect life was a total fabrication. I stood there, not with joy, but with a profound sense of dignity and relief that the secret was finally out. The perfect day was shattered beyond repair, and the man who had mocked me was now a cornered animal with nowhere to hide. I had finally reclaimed my voice, and the whole world was listening to the unemployed girl now. Mark's English accent slipped as he began to shout, his charm replaced by the snarl of a man who'd been caught. He tried to grab the folder, but my father held it tight, his eyes wide with the shocking realization of how much he'd been played. The guests were whispering, phones were coming out, and the perfect image my family worshipped was disintegrating. The truth was no longer a secret. It was a public spectacle that Mark couldn't manipulate his way out of. He failed to explain even the simplest document, his lies tangling together until he was tripping over his own words. I watched as the professional life he'd built to impress my parents was exposed as a hollow shell of fraud and theft. He looked at me with such hatred, but I just felt a sense of justice that he could never take away. He had lied to everyone, but he had finally run out of people who would believe him. One of my father's friends, a real investor, stepped forward and confirmed that the firm Mark claimed to own had been defunct for years. The humiliated feeling that usually belonged to me was now radiating off Mark like heat from a dying fire. My sister was trembling, realizing that the man she was about to tie her life to was a criminal ghost. This was the total destruction of a predator's carefully constructed world. My mother was frantic, trying to fix the situation, but no one moved. They were all staring at the man who had just been exposed as a fraud by the daughter they all used to pity. The family betrayal was now on full display, and the irony of it was that I was the one who saved them from a much worse fate. Mark finally stopped talking, his shoulders slumped, the weight of his own karma finally crushing him. He tried one last time to blame me, but no one was listening. The evidence was too loud, too clear, and too documented for his words to have any weight anymore. I felt a surge of self-worth that had nothing to do with their approval and everything to do with my own integrity. I had done the impossible. I had forced my family to see the truth, even if it broke their hearts. As the security, hired by my father, escorted Mark out of the estate, the silence that followed was heavier than the music had ever been. The unemployed sister had just dismantled a multi-million-dollar scam in under 10 minutes. I looked around the room and saw the perfect people looking at me with a mix of fear and newfound respect. But the justice was far from over. The real fallout was just beginning within the family itself. I expected a thank you, or at least a moment of shared relief, but instead, my mother's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "You ruined everything," she hissed, her voice trembling with the agony of a ruined reputation. They began to blame me for destroying the day, as if the fraud himself was less of a problem than the person who pointed him out. It was a family betrayal I should have seen coming, but it still cut like a knife. My father, instead of apologizing for his blindness, accused me of holding a grudge. They chose to value the image of a perfect wedding over the integrity of the truth I had just handed them. I was being backstabbed again, but this time I was the scapegoat for their own profound embarrassment. The humiliated looks they gave me were fueled by their own shame, and it was a shocking display of ego. Elena didn't even look at me. She just sobbed about how I'd made her the laughingstock of the city by exposing her fiancé. It didn't matter that I had saved her from a life of financial ruin. I had broken the perfect dream. Their self-worth was so tied to what others thought that they preferred a beautiful lie to a messy truth. I stood there, feeling shamed by their reaction, but I finally realized the problem wasn't me. It was them. "You could have told us privately," my father barked, ignoring the fact that they had spent months ignoring every subtle hint I'd tried to give. They were so desperate to maintain their status that they were willing to overlook a criminal in their midst as long as the neighbors didn't know. The disloyalty of their parental love was now undeniable. I felt a cold clarity washing over me, a realization that I was finally done with the family drama. They started arguing about how to spin this to the guests, already planning the lies they would tell to save face in the morning. I was invisible to them again, but this time I didn't care because I no longer wanted to be seen by people so blind. The justice I had sought for them was rejected, and in that rejection, I found my own liberation. I realized that you can't save people who are more afraid of a scandal than they are of a shark. I looked at the three of them, my mother, my father, and my sister, and saw a group of strangers who just happened to share my DNA. They were so caught up in their own karma that they couldn't see the woman who had just saved their future. I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself, and I didn't ask for their forgiveness for doing the right thing. I simply turned my back on the perfect scene, knowing that my dignity was the only thing I needed to take with me. I walked out of that ballroom, the sound of my heels echoing on the marble like a countdown to a new life I was finally starting. I felt no regret, no what-ifs, and no desire to turn back and see the wreckage of the perfect day I'd just ended. Realizing that self-worth sometimes requires cutting ties with those who never protected you was the most powerful feeling I'd ever had. I was reclaiming my peace, and it started with leaving that toxic house of cards behind for good. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in 26 years, I felt like I could finally breathe without permission. I was no longer the unemployed daughter, the embarrassment, or the charity case they had tried so hard to make me believe I was. I was a woman who had faced a predator and won, even if the prize was the loss of a family that never truly loved me. The family betrayal was over, because I was no longer a part of the family that betrayed. I got into my car and didn't even look in the rearview mirror as I drove away from the estate and the flashing lights. I had my dignity, I had the truth, and I had a future that wasn't dictated by someone else's need for status. Being backstabbed by my parents was the final lesson I needed to learn that I was enough on my own. I felt a sense of justice that was quiet and internal, a flame that would never be blown out by their laughter again. I thought about Mark, probably halfway to the next state by now, and I realized he wasn't the real villain of my story. My family's obsession was. He was just a symptom of a much deeper disease of image over integrity that had plagued our lives for years. I was finally cured of it, and the cost was a wedding dress and some expensive flowers that were never going to bloom anyway. It was a shocking price to pay, but the freedom I felt was worth every single penny. I smiled to myself as I reached the highway, the city lights twinkling in the distance like possibilities I was finally ready to explore. I was the architect of my own life now, and the foundation was built on the truth, not on lies and gold leaf. I had lost a family, but I had found myself, and in the end, that was the only justice that actually mattered. My journey wasn't ending. It was finally, truly beginning on my own terms. I've realized that walking away from people you love isn't always an act of abandonment. Sometimes, it's the ultimate act of liberation. People will tell you that family is everything, but they forget to mention that a family without dignity and truth is just a pretty cage. I stood my ground, spoke the truth, and I lost everything they told me I should value, only to find everything I actually needed. I found my self-worth in the very moment I stopped asking for theirs. The payback wasn't in the public exposure of a fraud. It was in the private realization that I didn't need their validation to be someone. I hope my story makes you reflect on whether speaking up or leaving behind toxic bonds is actually the harder path to take. Sometimes, the most shocking thing you can do is simply stop playing a game that was designed for you to lose. Your dignity is not a negotiable currency, and don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. I am the woman who shattered a wedding and saved herself, and I've never been more proud of a ruined day in my life. The justice I found wasn't in a courtroom, but in the mirror, and it's a reflection I finally love. Your story doesn't have to end where theirs begins. You have the power to write your own then.